For many holidaymakers around the world, the chance to experience real magic and the awfully big adventure that comes with a trip to one of the famous mouse's houses is exactly what dreams are made of. So join us as we explore the endless possibilities of that great big beautiful world of Disney as we travel to the magic.
Yes, hello and welcome to episode 4 of Travel to the Magic for the week of Thursday, the 24th of June. It's Tom, and as the title of this episode suggests, we are going to be going to Disney and back in 24 hours. A real journey that I actually did on Friday last week when Disneyland Paris Resort in France reopened to the general public, becoming the last of the Disney resorts around the globe to reopen. We now have every single Disney destination on the planet fully open again for the first time in, I think, 15 months, if my mathematics have worked out right. And of course, the Disney cruise ships are not far behind. The UK staycation sailings are just about to start in July. And also, we're getting word as well that there may be some test sailings going on for the Disney Cruise Line fleet in the US waters as well. So it's all very exciting. We're almost there. We're almost back to normality. But yes, last week on the 17th of June, Disneyland Paris finally reopened their doors to the general public. Now, they did offer annual pass holders 2 AP preview days on the 15th and on the 16th, which unfortunately I wasn't able to go to because the ongoing pandemic, of course, as we know, has caused a bit of chaos in the travel industry. So it was really reliant on when flights were going to be doing that one-day turnaround. And I could have gone on the 15th or the 16th, but it would have meant spending less than about 5 minutes in the actual park before having to go back to the airport to fly home again. So that was never going to be an option. I wanted a full day in the Disney parks, both of them, Disneyland Park and the Walt Disney Studios Park, so we could properly welcome back the magic. And for sure, we did that. We went live on our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube, Fly Mickey Travel. If you're not following us and liking us already, then go and like us along with Another Disney Podcast as well. We always like to be liked. It's always nice to be liked. So we did that. We went live in the parks. We'll talk about that in a moment or two, our experience of going live in the parks with the magic. Now, you may be asking yourself the question, why did we do this and why for only 24 hours? Both very good questions, because in normal times, we would suggest that 2 days is your kind of minimum at Disneyland Paris Resort. An average stay would be 4 days, and a lengthy stay would be 7 days. And in those 7 days, we would suggest that you went around Paris and you soaked up some of the local culture as well as the magic of the Disneyland parks. But this was not going to be one of those normal times due to the inbound and outbound flight times that we were constrained by. So it kind of led itself towards a social experiment. Could we travel to a Disney park from one country to another country, have a full day of magic, and fit it all into a 24-hour period? Which, spoiler alert, I actually managed to do quite comfortably. Now, with my Infinity annual pass, I am allowed to use the extra magic hours, usually allotted for Disneyland hotel guests only. But because of the inbound flight time and, of course, the time it takes to get from the airport to the parks, I didn't quite make that period. But I did make it for park opening and pretty much stayed through until the close of the day. And there wasn't much throughout the day that I wasn't able to or couldn't actually do. So let's take it right back to the early hours of Friday morning when we started this mammoth 24 hours to Disney and back. Now, I don't know if you are like me, but if you have to be up at a set certain time in the morning, or you know you've got to be somewhere by a set time, I always overthink these things, and I set myself about 500 alarms on my phone, and each one has to have a different Disney ringtone. I know, very sad. That gets me out of bed, and if I put the phones the other side of the room, you haven't got any choice but to get up and go and put them on mute, because otherwise I might oversleep and then go miss my flight. But before these kind of Disney trips, I find it very, very difficult to go to sleep at all. And that's usually because my anticipation and excitement for heading back to my home, my happy place that is Disneyland Paris, is always at an all-time high. But of course, I hadn't been there in over 15 months. In fact, I was due to be in the Disneyland Paris resort parks on the day that COVID brought in all the lockdowns in March of 2020. So you can imagine I've had a lot of excitement building up for many, many months. So wasn't going to be sleeping whatsoever, and my poor dogs had no idea what was going on either, except for the fact that I was sending them out to go to the toilet at 4 o'clock in the morning because I was going to be leaving for the airport at 4:45. Now, what I should mention at this point in the podcast is where I was traveling from that made this whole 24-hour test trip possible, because it wouldn't be possible to do it from a lot of locations. For example, you couldn't do it in 24 hours if you were flying from Orlando International, because you're looking at an average flight time of around 8 hours. You couldn't do this certainly from the Asia Disney parks, because that would be a 12-hour standard one-way flight. Your 24 hours would be eaten up just with flying. But also, you've got to take into consideration the current COVID restrictions that are in place and the rules and regulations regarding entry and exit from France. So, this is how it was possible, because I'm actually based in Spain. Even though our head office is in the UK, we are a borderless travel agency that we spoke about in the last episode that allows us to have several offices around the world, and I just happened to have been in the Spanish office when I came up with this brilliant idea for a 24-hour round trip. Now, you could do this if you were in the United Kingdom, because you're looking at an average flight time to Paris, either to Charles de Gaulle International Airport or to Orly International Airport, which is just on the outer boundaries of Paris, with an average flight time of around an hour and 30 minutes. From Spain, we're looking at an average of an hour and 50 minutes. So it's not too longer a flight, more like a quick hop across the road. So at this time, anyone from Spain can enter into France no problems at all, because the entire of the European Union is currently on the green list for France, which means we can enter the country no problems at all. If you're not vaccinated, you can have either a PCR test or the cheaper, much cheaper antigen test to go into the country and fill out a little declaration form to say that you've not been unwell before traveling. But if you are vaccinated, you can enter the country no problem whatsoever. No quarantines, no testing too. So that's quite a big weight off the shoulders. Plus, also coming from a European country into another European country, there is no border issues in between, so we don't need to worry about standing in queue for hours at a border control post. If you're coming from the UK, of course, that's not quite the same. You will need to spend some time at border control getting into Europe first. But hopefully that wouldn't take too much of your day up, maybe a maximum of an hour at the moment. Plus, of course, those COVID checks to be done too. But of course, all of this is current information, and at the time that you travel, things may have changed quite dramatically. We may be back to normality where we can travel freely with no tests required, or maybe we might be in a slightly different situation. So before you head to any airports for your holidays this year, do just check the official websites for the country that you are heading to and the country that you are coming from for all the entry and exit requirements, what tests and bits of paper that you may need to be able to get in and out of those destinations, so that you don't get stopped going on your magical vacation. Because I did witness that on this journey, people arriving at the gate to board the plane and being denied entry because they either didn't simply have the paperwork that was required, that was easily downloadable and completable before going to the airport, or they simply had not looked to check what kind of tests were required before entering the country, which again was easily doable before heading towards the airport. So just make sure that you're not wasting any time or any of your money by not doing these simple things up front. But I had done all that, so I had the right paperwork and I had my antigen test. It was well within date, and because we were traveling within 24 hours, I only needed that one test because it was covering me for a 72-hour period, so I was quite happy about that. No extra cost to be laid out for extra tests. Had a stress-free flight all the way over to Orly International Airport there on the outskirts of Paris. Our pilot did say that the day was going to be overcast with a good chance of rain. That didn't impress me very much, but But thankfully, he was absolutely wrong. Landed, in fact, 10 minutes early and was at the arrival hall to meet my taxi to the parks within 10 minutes of disembarking the plane. So my start to my 24 hours had gone very, very well. Now, there was a slight hiccup in that France was having some airport strikes on the day that I landed. I knew about this when I took off, but thankfully it didn't cause any delays with the flight and air traffic control. It was more to do with ground handling staff, but we were good. We got out of the airport in good time. We had a slight slow start to get out from the car park with the private taxi service that I'd booked in advance, but we were on our way, and within 50 minutes we arrived at Disneyland Paris. Now, if this was your first trip to Disneyland Paris, you may have been a little bit nervous about the rows upon rows of security tents and metal detectors that you need to go through first before you're allowed to get anywhere near to the two Disney parks. But don't worry, the security on site are absolutely friendly. They are all part of the magical experience as well. They are just there to make sure that you have a safe time and that everybody entering the parks is there to enjoy the magic and not to cause any trouble. But it's quite easy. There are metal detectors you walk through and bag scanners as well. Dead simple, and you're into the parks. Generally, there is a bit of a queue for those extra magic hours in the morning and the early part of the day. But as we were going on the opening weekend, and of course capacity was limited, there was no waiting time whatsoever. So once through security, my first Disney tradition kicks in, and I go inside my bag and get out my Disney lanyard, which has all of my Disney pins on that I've collected from different parks that if I get a chance I will trade with other pin collectors in the parks as well. That's a little bit more tricky at the moment because of the COVID restrictions, but again, in general terms, it's great to get the different pins from the different parks and different seasons and festivals and then swap with other like-minded fans. So I got my lanyard out, it's around my neck. Also on my lanyard is a plastic holder that has my annual pass in it. It also holds any fast passes that I would normally get, although again on this trip we weren't able to use any fast passes, but it's nice to have somewhere that you can put all that into one place. And if you were staying in a Disney resort as well, you would get your Magic Pass, which is your room key and your access into the parks as well. And so if you had a lanyard with one of these plastic holders, or you can get character ones as well, it's just a very convenient place to keep all of that together for when you're going through the main entrance gates. If you're park hopping as well, it saves some time hunting down where your different tickets are. And of course, if you are getting fast pass cards too, keeps it all in one place. Now, when you get through those security gates, you've got two choices. Go right and head towards Disneyland Park, or turn left and go towards the Walt Disney Studios Park. Of course, if you turned a lot more left, you could also go towards the Disney Village, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on in this podcast. But like a lot of people, I turned right and headed towards the beautiful Victorian facade of the Disneyland Hotel that you need to go underneath to get into the main park. Now, the Disneyland Hotel, as some of you may know, is undergoing a major refurbishment. In fact, it will be the first Disney hotel on the planet to have a royal theme. It's doing a complete overhaul of the entire Victorian building. All 5,700 rooms are going to have a makeover and will be infused with that royal theme and become a true kingdom of many of your favourite Disney princesses and princes, from the classics like Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and of course from Frozen and from Tangled as well. And they're going to be reimagining some of the guest areas too. And if you've been to Disneyland Paris before, or at least maybe seen some videos on YouTube of it before, you'll know that this hotel has the privilege of being positioned right at the front of the Disneyland park. And its beautiful landscape gardens right in front of the main entrance tend to be where people stop and take their first Disneyland Paris resort selfie from. And this is because the hotel has a giant version of the Mickey Mouse watch face right there on the front of the hotel. And you can't help but stop, admire the gardens, the waterfall, see the hotel and go, gotta get a selfie of this. Gotta get a picture of me with the Mickey Mouse watch in the background. It is one of those selfie moments. I guarantee you, when you go to Disneyland Paris, you will see loads of people stood or queuing to get themselves that perfect selfie moment before even entering the parks. It's, again, another Disney tradition. So we've done our picture now. taken our picture. I did the same thing. I've been there a million times before, still took the picture. Then headed towards the underpasses underneath the hotel, and this was my first wow moment going back to Disneyland Paris, because normally when you walk through these underpasses, they are roped off lines that lead down towards big green booths with very dated ticket scanning machines that block your view into the resort. Well, that's all changed over the last 15 months. They've done away with all these old-looking booths and instead installed state-of-the-art turnstiles with glass doors that now give you a glorious look into the top end of Main Street USA while you wait to get in, and it's absolutely an incredible major change for the resort. It shows them stepping further forwards into the future and also improving that guest experience from the very first moment you get to the resort. Now, this was also a perfect time to test out my brand new Infinity Annual Pass card. Never been used before since I purchased it just before the pandemic kicked in. So at the main gates, there is an opportunity that if your card or your pass doesn't scan properly, that the cast members can allow you in. Now, my card had an expiry date, of course, of last year, which has been extended. So the cast members themselves had to let me into the park. But that was quite easy because these new gates look at the picture that's on the card. If they cannot match that picture to your face or to the validity of that card, then the cast member the other side also gets to see an image of your face and can say yes or no to entry based on whether they like your face or not, basically. But thankfully, they liked mine and they let me into the park. And this was just like returning home. Oh my God, to be back on Main Street USA. It was a beautiful, glorious blue sky day. The weather was warm. It was quite busy, considering there is a cap of 28,000 in the park at this moment in time. Certainly, there wasn't 28,000 people there, but it felt reasonably busy, which is always a good thing, that you can share the magic with other Disney fans. So there we were on Main Street USA, finally back in Disneyland Park. Plenty of cast members around the park with the signs to remind you about the social distancing and the mask wearing policy, because even though in France, actually starting on that day that I was there, the outdoor mask rules were no longer required, Disney still requires you to wear a mask all the way throughout their property and all the rides, except when you're actively eating or drinking. This rule, of course, will change in the future, but currently that is the requirements and the social distancing requirements as well. But in my opinion, having to wear the mask all day really wasn't a big issue, because there were so many other things to distract my attention throughout the day, like returning to the magic and going on my favourite ride. So I wouldn't worry too much about going to a Disney park at the moment and having to wear a mask all day, because it really wasn't a big deal. And in most places, the social distancing was observed perfectly fine, except only in one ride that I went on, which I'll explain a little bit later in the podcast, where some people weren't particularly obeying the social distancing rules, but cast members on the whole were there to make sure that you kept that distance, to make sure that everybody was having a safe and enjoyable time inside both the parks. Now, for most Disney fans, when you go to a Disney resort, you have a preferred direction that you like to head when adventuring around a Disney destination. And so, before we make our right-hand turn into our first land to explore for the day, we of course need to go down Main Street USA. And in Paris, this street is themed ever so slightly differently to other Main Street USAs at other Disney resorts. It's decorated a little bit more modern, somewhere between the turn of the century and the 1920s, has a bit of a flapper and ragtime and rise of the automobile era type feel to the facades and the kind of atmosphere that you can soak up as you walk down Main Street USA. And there are two alternative ways to walk down there as well, should the weather be a little bit inclement for you. There is the Discovery Arcade, which is on the side of Discoveryland, and the Liberty Arcade, which is on the other side heading towards Frontierland. So if you do find that you're there and it is unfortunately raining or snowing, as it does or sometimes in January, you do have those two alternative ways to walk down the main section of the opening part of the park, which takes you down, of course, to Sleeping Beauty's castle, to the beautifully landscaped gardens around there. Now, the castle at this moment in time is currently undergoing its first ever major refurbishment in time for the 30th anniversary that's coming up next year. So right now it is covered with a 3D modelled scrim, and it's the first time that Disney have used this type of covering on any attraction or icon in order to be able to carry out maintenance works. And the reason for this is it allows the castle to still have that kind of 3D look about it. So if you want to get those iconic photographs, you are less likely to be disappointed with the outcome. Plus, where they have finished off renovating certain elements of the castle, they've already started to remove those parts of the 3D modelling scrim, so we can now see the renovation of the top spires and a couple of the outer spires as well. If you've watched the YouTube videos about the renovation, you will know that the cast members of the park have written little messages and place them inside a box which has been put inside one of those spires and has been placed back onto the castle and will never be opened again. And those messages are about the hopes and dreams of the cast members for the future of the resort, which I think is absolutely amazing. It's like a time capsule that you never know. Maybe one day in the future someone will open up. But as it stands right now, they plan for it never to be revealed. But those dreams and wishes are now locked inside Sleeping Beauty's castle. So in general terms, this 3D modelling scrim over the castle doesn't really take away too much of the magic of visiting the Disneyland resort at this time. In fact, you can still get some amazing photographs of the castle on a nice blue sky day, because it's kind of hard to tell in places what is real castle and what is 3D modelled. It's quite cool. And when you get right up close to that printed scrim, it's so well detailed that you're not going to be too disappointed about the outcome of your photographs. So now that we've looked at the castle, we take our first right-hand turn into Discoveryland, the first land that we will be going into on our 24 Hours to Disney and Back podcast. Now, in future podcasts, I will delve into the history and development of each of the lands at the Disneyland Paris resort, and of course, other resorts around the world as well. But in this episode, we're just going to have a guided tour of what we did on our 24-hour day trip. And the first thing I noticed in Discoveryland, well, actually, I say the first thing because it wasn't apparent to me until I got really, really close to it. And it's an Imagineering trick that you will probably have experienced yourself if you visited any of the Disney parks at the time when they're doing some refurbishment or maintenance work. And that's called the go-away green walls. Now, of course, it doesn't actually make anything particularly invisible or make it actually go away, but the specially blended set of colours that Disney uses on these walls, whether it's a wooden facade around an attraction whilst they're doing some maintenance, or maybe on some features on some concrete walls that are going to be there permanently but they don't want you to particularly notice, they will tend to paint them in either go-away green or in the alternative colour palette of blending blue, which is often used at Walt Disney World. And the ultimate goal of these two colour palettes is to basically make anything painted with them ignorable by the guests of the parks. And I can tell you it definitely works, because as I walked into Discoveryland live casting the entire experience, I did not even notice that Hyperspace Mountain was completely covered in walling all the way round with this go-away green until I pretty much almost walked straight into it. So it definitely works. If you've ever been to a Disney park and you don't notice that something's just not there, it's probably because it's painted in go-away green or blending blue. Ingenious concept for sure. Now, one of the first things I did notice throughout the Disneyland park is that everything feels so much fresher, cleaner. It's definitely had some paintwork done here, there, and everywhere, and everything just feels so new and magical. Even though I have been there many times before, it felt like I was exploring a brand new park. And there are some things that were closed the last time I went that are now opened, like Buzz Lightyear's Laser Blast, which has had a whole new facial facade created for it, and the ride inside has had a complete upgrade. All the lights have been changed to LEDs, which gives it a more vibrant colouring in there, and they've replaced those targets that didn't work before with new targets and a load more targets as well. So there is a better chance of you reaching that top score if you're going to ride that attraction when you're at the park. But now that I'm in Discoveryland, it's time to ride my first attraction of the day, and that's Star Tours. I love this attraction because since it's had its overlay change done to include more of the newer Star Wars movies, you are almost guaranteed to have a unique experience every time you're on board the simulator, because every time you jump to hyperspace, the next segment of the story is randomized. So it's probably going to take you a good number of rides before you have a repeated experience, which I think is, again, a great example of how Imagineers have thought outside the box when taking an original ride and modernizing it, plussing it, as Walt Disney himself would say. So, having disembarked the Star Tours simulator, I next headed towards Fantasyland and those traditional tick-tockings that you will hear when you're walking past the It's a Small World ride. Now, I didn't go on it this time round, not because I don't love the attraction. It is an iconic, classic attraction that anybody who goes to a Disney park should ride. But because I was only there for 24 hours, I wanted to do some of the other attractions that I have been dying to ride for almost 15 months. So It's a Small World was a bypass this time round, but I have been on it many times before, and that tune is very firmly stuck inside my head. So there is no fear of me forgetting what that ride is like. So on we went then into Adventureland to ride Pirates of the Caribbean. But just before I joined the queue for the attraction, there was Captain Jack Sparrow himself on the balcony above his own restaurant, Captain Jack's, which is located inside the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. And it's a wonderful restaurant to go into. The food is always really, really nice in there. The atmosphere and the ambience is great as well. You get that kind of sights and sounds and smells of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride as well, whilst watching guests float past as they head into the main attraction. Now, my next port of call is somewhere that I always get lost when I am trying to find the ride when I go to Disneyland Paris. No matter how many times I head to the resort, I always get lost trying to find the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril roller coaster. Don't know why. I always seem to struggle to remember where this roller coaster is located. But I do have some fond memories of riding this attraction in the early days when it actually used to go backwards. And that's because the Imagineers wanted to up the capacity of the ride whilst giving you an additional experience that you didn't get in many other parks. So they redesigned it, made it go backwards, which was very thrilling because it has a very tight loop that takes you upside down in the center part of the roller coaster, and therefore not knowing when this was coming was quite thrilling. But ever since then, for whatever reasons, the park has reversed it, and now you ride it facing forwards and away you go. But it's still a thrilling little roller coaster, still very, very speedy, and gives you a lot of excitement whilst you're on it. It's just not necessarily easy to find it, or at least I don't find it very easy to find. So I went from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril into Frontierland, where my all-time favorite ride is housed. And that, of course, is BTM, for short for us Disneyland Paris fans, Big Thunder Mountain. Now, the last time I went to the parks, it was shut down for maintenance, and they literally opened it just as I was leaving the park. So I've had a very long wait to get onto my favorite attraction of any Disney park at all. Now, the reason I love this version of Big Thunder Mountain over any other version of the same attraction is that Paris's version sits on an island in the middle of the lake that the Molly Brown riverboat sails around. And to get onto the island, you have to board your minecart at Thunder Mesa in Frontierland first, before being propelled underwater in a thrilling, pitch-black, speedy adventure to get to the main elements of the roller coaster. And then it is just a rush the entire time that you are on board it until you go back underwater again, even faster. I'm not even sure it actually goes faster. It just feels a lot faster as you race back into the Thunder Mesa station in Frontierland. Most definitely one ride you've got to do if you're going to Disneyland Paris. But the other ride in Frontierland that you've really got to go and do as well is the Phantom Manor Dark Ride. Now, this was the first time that I'd had to queue for any particular length of time, and it wasn't particularly long, to be fair. It was around 20 minutes before getting to the ride, and the main reason for that is inside they have had to mark out set areas for people to stand, whereas in normal times you would all just corral into the pre-show area before going into the stretching room, before heading into the main queue area to board your ride vehicle. But during these COVID times, they have numbers projected onto the floor that the cast members ask you to stand on, and then you only move once the cast member directs you into the next element. But none of this really distracted from the actual ride itself, because there is so much going on. The stretching room is still amazing. All of the little side attractions that you see, the moving paintings in the queue lines, are still really thrilling, and the ride itself is still absolutely amazing to go on to. So COVID really hasn't caused much of a change in the experience you'll have on Phantom Manor. And so that was the last attraction that I did at the Disneyland Park before heading over to the Walt Disney Studios Park. And for anybody who has an annual pass for DLP, you may want to stop just before going into the studios at the annual pass office and check that your card is still valid and whether you need to renew or get an updated version of your original annual pass, because my one wouldn't scan to allow me into the Walt Disney Studios Park, even though I'd spent most of the morning at the main Disneyland Park. So not a problem. Went to the annual pass office. The cast members there were incredibly helpful. Within about 5 minutes, they redid me a new card with a new validity date on there and a new photo that the machines accepted. So you might want to save yourself just a little bit of time and head straight to the annual pass office at the entrance to the Walt Disney Studios Park before entering, just to make sure that your card is going to work when you get to those brand new glass-fronted terminals that are at this park as well. So what I should say about the Walt Disney Studios Park is that there is not a huge amount open, as there are 3 new lands on the way, with Avengers Campus, very similar to Disneyland California's version, opening in 2022. Arendelle, a Frozen Land experience, will be opening shortly after that, and Galaxy's Edge, Star Wars Land, will be opening as well. All very exciting things happening on the horizon, but of course the day that I went to the park, none of those are yet open, so part of the park is very much feeling like it's under construction. But we still had Toontown, we still had Toy Story Land, and we still had what I like to call the French Pavilion. I'm not even sure that's the real name for the area, but it's where you'll find Remy's Ratatouille Adventure. Not even going to try and pronounce the French name for the ride, but this was the attraction that I wanted to head to first, purely because the waiting time for this ride is usually really long. In the summer, it can be up to as long as 3 hours to wait to get on it. This time, though, I think I may have waited the lengthy time of 3 minutes to get on board. So absolutely thrilled with the very short queue time. Put on my 3D glasses and really enjoyed an adventure with Remy on this attraction. But what was good about this is it gave me some more time to go and explore around the park and to continue with the live stream that I've been doing in the other park, and also to go and hunt down the latest new ride at the Walt Disney Studios Park, the Cars Route 66 Tram Tour, which is a reimagining of the original tram tour. It takes you through some really cool little show scenes, introduces some of the Cars characters as well along the way, and then takes you into Catastrophe Canyon, where, of course, if you've never experienced thousands and thousands and thousands of gallons of water being rushed straight at you in a stunt spectacular, then this is a ride that's really going to wow you. I'd done this type of ride before, so I didn't go on it this time round, but I know people that have and have really enjoyed the Cars new retheming of the original tram tour, although a lot shorter ride now than it used to be before because of those new lands that are coming. Also, there is Tower of Terror, the drop lift dark ride that is in that park as well. Looking at my watch, I didn't have enough time to ride that one and to go on my final ride of the day, which I was dying to do, which also happened to have the lengthiest of all wait times that I'd experienced throughout my 24 hours at Disneyland Paris, and that was was Crush's coaster with a queue of over 50 minutes. Now, this is a very, very popular ride. It is a continuously loading roller coaster where you board a turtle shell, head through some iconic show scenes from the Finding Nemo movie before being thrust into the roller coaster portion of the ride that represents the East Australian Current, where you'll find yourselves being spiraled and churned and whipped and thrown all over the roller coaster track before returning to Sydney Harbour. Believe me, it is a thrill ride that everybody's going to love. It really is a family type ride as well. Even though it is a very fast-paced roller coaster, I have seen kids as young as 5 and 6 come off it with humongous smiles on their faces. It really is an attraction you do not want to miss if you're going to Disneyland Paris, and totally worth the wait time, even though this was the only ride that I experienced people not observing the social distancing requirements. The queue is quite tightly compact to get your way into the main show building, and unfortunately cast members were not able to keep people apart until you were inside and just about to board your coaster carriage. But on a general note, I still felt very safe. I had my mask on. Everybody else around us had masks on as well, and it was still a great experience. So that was the last attraction that I was going to be riding for the day, but my day was not complete because on the way out of the Studios Park, I got to see Remy himself riding in his car around the park. If I didn't think that was a highlight of my day, the last character of the day that I got to see as I left the resort was Mickey Mouse himself, waving from the balcony inside Studio One. That, to me, was how you complete your day at Disneyland Paris. To see the mouse himself say goodbye totally left me with a real big smile on my face and a lot of magic in my heart. And so that was a perfect way to finish my 24 hours to Disney and back experience. Headed off to the airport, no problems there whatsoever. Back to Spain within a couple of hours and back home with a lot of fantastic memories from my day at Disneyland Paris. And it's certainly proved it is something that anybody who lives within a reasonable traveling distance of the parks can do, whether you have an annual pass or you just want to buy yourself one singular day of magic. Something you should definitely be considering booking for yourself. And I've definitely been planning out my next trip, which will probably be in a few weeks' time, because it was a great experience. And that brings us to the end of episode 4. Thank you so much for listening to me rabbit on for almost 40 minutes about my 24 hours to Disney and back experience. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions for travel to the magic topics you would like to see featured on a future episode, then just drop us a message via Another Disney Podcast. And until we talk again, have yourself an absolute magical day.